session is recorded. And afterwards, please take a moment to fill out the survey. You can access that within the mobile app as well as online. Attendees should receive a daily email with survey links to access these evaluations. All right, so let's jump into some introductions. Now, I could stand up here all day long telling you about all the incredible things that these three guys have accomplished. But I think it's important that we all are reminded every once in a while that there is so much more to us than just the jobs that we do and the title of actuary. So I'm actually going to share a couple of fun facts about each of these guys so you can get to know them. And then I'm going to pass it off so they can give you a little bit more detail about their professional journey, because I think that context will be extremely helpful as you hear their responses throughout the conversation. So first up, we have Rafael Costa, who is an actuary partner at Cruise. He is the first Brazilian to ever receive the FCAS designation. And he is an active volunteer on 3 CAS groups: the exam committee as a grader, Latin America Regional Working Group, and co-chaired the task force that developed the recently launched Introduction to Data and Analytics online course. Rafael?
Thank you, Chelsea. So my career started in Brazil, as you could see there, when I joined Zurich. And Zurich created this international rotation program for Latin American actuaries, and I was the first one to join that program. So I was fortunate enough to get the opportunity to come to the US, and I never went back, as you can tell. I'm here still. So worked at Farmers, which is a company that's part of the Zurich group in Los Angeles. After that, and based in Los Angeles, and after that I actually moved here to the Twin Cities and worked for Travelers for a little bit. It was just 9 months. Then worked at Uber in the international pricing team. And now I work at Cruise. For those of you who don't know Cruise, it's a company that's a subsidiary of General Motors that's developing self-driving technology. Very excited to be here. I'm not the accomplished guy that Chelsea said we probably are, but I hope we can help you with some tips and tricks for yourselves and for your teams on how to be or continue to be the actuaries of the future.
Thanks, Rafael. And he's just humble. All right, next up we have Dominic Lee. He is a senior solutions advisor at CAS. Dom is also the Jamaican national record holder in the 200-meter breaststroke. And as a former swimmer, I am very, very impressed by that. So hopefully you are too. And he is also the second most followed actuary on LinkedIn. Dom?
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Dominic Lee here. I'm from Jamaica, as Chelsea alluded to. My career started out, I would say, very traditionally. I spent almost 10 years at Travelers Insurance, went through their, and can everyone in the back hear me, just making sure? Yeah. Yes, went through their leadership development program, had great opportunities to work in personal lines, in small commercial, middle market, specialty. Had the opportunity to manage several people as well, so really good foundational experience in property and casualty. Then, right around the pandemic period, I did a couple of shorter roles in P&C. And I came across an insight during the pandemic. Because I was in between jobs, I had time to observe and really immerse myself in what was happening. And I noticed that actuaries weren't, at least on the front lines of the pandemic response, and from my perspective, not really impacting the decisions. And when you think of the pandemic, it was largely a medical crisis, but there were many other very relevant risk management considerations. You know, how to triage critical healthcare supplies, how to distribute funds, how to strategically reopen institutions, and I thought that actuaries could have played more of a role there, certainly in the US. And then it inspired me to do this TED-style talk beyond insurance, where I talked about utilizing the actuarial skill set. More broadly speaking, got great traction, and then it kind of helped to pivot me to the software side. So in today's world, I'm working at CAS on the pre-sales side, of very different roles than most actuaries would be in. I'm focused on helping the company to sell technology solutions to the insurance market. So I'm on the other side of the table, which is really interesting. So many of you are my clients as opposed to just my company peers. I get to work on cool things like marketing campaigns, email marketing campaigns, social media campaigns. which is really interesting. And this image I thought was interesting. This is kind of like my life today. I also run a multi-platform content community called Actuary. Run all the 12 major social platforms, and we just released a website. And the overarching objective is to maximize the impact and value of bank professionals, including actuaries, of course, on a global scale. So that's what I'm focused on now. I'm very excited to be here and speak with you.
Thanks, Tom. And last but not least, we have Josh Taub. He's an instructor for CAS exams 5 and 8 with the Building the Actuary. He's traveled to over 70 countries, and of the 189 new fellows being admitted at this annual meeting, over 75% of them have taken a course by Josh. Josh?
Well, thank you. Hopefully my voice isn't causing any traumatic flashbacks. Yep, I started my career at Farmers as well, like Rafael, and actually was a curious stroke of luck that I ended up going into the P&C side. When I was in college, I was interviewing for a health insurance company and Farmers, and the interviews were a couple days apart, and I did Farmers first, and they made me an offer, and then I had an interview on the Friday of that week from the health insurance company, and their hiring manager was out of the office and on vacation, and so they couldn't get back to me in time, whereas Farmers, like, we need a decision within a week. So I'm like, all right, well, I guess I'll take the sure thing at Farmers. And lo and behold, I'm on the P&C side now. So I started in homeowners product management, so doing rate indications, and then eventually became a product manager. So it was not just the one creating the rate indications, but also the one making the business decisions about what rates to take, working with the different other groups in the company, agents and underwriters on making our business successful. Then went over to the claims group for Farmers, which was a really cool opportunity to start a claims actuarial team. So it was kind of an entrepreneurial role, since there was like, what can we do with a math guy in claims, and basically go figure out and look at our data, do what you want, and got to seek out my own projects. Ended up doing catastrophe reserving for all the companies in the Farmers group, doing a lot of predictive modeling projects there. Just different other types of analyses, but it's really insightful because you get to be in claims, which is the biggest source of uncertainty in our data, and to go there firsthand and see what's going on from a claims operational standpoint, how they think about things, is really useful. And then I went over to the commercial product group at Farmers for a while, managed mostly work comp, but also some commercial property, commercial auto. Then I left Farmers and was kind of looking for something new, another growth opportunity, and thought about different things, but reached out to a former Farmers colleague who was at the Building the Actuary and said, hey, I've always thought about teaching, not necessarily actual science actually, but this is something that seemed like it could be a good fit. And it turns out there was an opportunity available a couple months later. I applied and got it, and so I've been doing that for almost 10 years. And also I have gotten a lot more into the startup and venture capital scene, both in insurance and just generally. My wife has a venture capital fund now. I work with her on the back end for some of that stuff, using my kind of technical chops that I have through the actual profession to help her with some of the things there. And then I also worked at an insurtech startup called Swift for about 2 years. I was their VP product and pricing and chief actuary. They do homeowners insurance and some commercial property as well.
Thanks, Josh. All right, so we have quite a few questions prepared to discuss during this panel session, but we are going to reserve about 10 to 15 minutes at the end for questions that you guys have, so please be thinking about those. Also, I just want to highly encourage everyone to a call to action, if you will. These three guys have invested a ton of time preparing their responses for today, and honestly, I got so hyped for this session reading through all of them because there's just so much good wisdom and a lot that we can really take action on. So I would encourage you, as you are listening, please don't just listen and agree. Try to find at least one thing that you can take from today that you will either bring back to your team or that you will do to develop yourself in your professional journey. So, jumping into our first question, what skills have become more important for actuaries to have today compared to the past? Why have these become more important? For this one, let's start with Rafael.
All right. So we heard from Dom saying about the pandemic and the way that actuaries were not really involved in the solution of problems, or from Josh about how he's using his skills on the venture capital side. So it seems like we can do a lot with our technical skills, right? So the actuary of the past was basically scorekeeping. We spent a lot of time manipulating data, creating tools with clunky data sets. And now we have access to a lot more. We have access to more automated open source tools. We have access to a lot more data, cleaner data. I know we all complain about our data, but compared to what people probably had 10, 20, 30 years ago. So there's a lot more we can do with that. So our skill set is shifting from being purely technical to actually enabling us. The technology and the data are enabling us to go beyond those technical issues. So what we need to develop is, and you've probably heard this a ton of times, communication, presentation skills, and really turning our data into insights, actionable insights. But you may have seen the updated CAS and Vision feature, which focuses on applying our skill set in solving problems. So these words are keywords. So we need to get involved in the solution of problems. And there are gonna be more questions later. We're gonna talk a little bit more about how you can do that. So for now, let's say, keep that in mind. Our skills, our technical skills, our hard skills are super important. They will continue to be important, but we need to take it a step forward. We need to take it beyond that because of all that free time that we now have with the better tools have been giving us.
Great. Dom, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so when I think of this question, I think of three trends. I think of three trends that are really disrupting the environment in which actuaries operate. And they've really put the actuarial value proposition under a microscope. The first is automation. How many people here use like Visual Basic? Many people. But to be truthful, a lot of times, like certainly in some of the roles I've seen in the past, actuaries spend a lot of time just doing processes, speeding processes up. Not really, in my mind, solving problems, but with the advent of things like robotic process automation, that can, I think that's going to reduce the demand for what I call the mechanical technical skills, just the pressing and the coding and Visual Basic and things of that nature. So the first skill I mentioned is that's really relevant now is problem solving, really being intentional and deliberate in terms of problems you're solving. Figuring out, first of all, what problems need to be solved, because not every problem is relevant and material to the company, why it needs to be solved. This one is really important. I remember in my first year, the chief operating officer of the company, he said something that resonated with me, very simple. He said, if you don't understand two things, if you don't understand how your job is impacting putting business on the books and resolving claims, then you need to figure it out soon. You need to understand how your role or your job is directly impacting the company from a business value perspective. So like I said, problem solving is the first one that comes to mind. Now the second trend is artificial intelligence and machine learning becoming mainstream. AI and ML enables the processing of newer forms of data, audio, image, text, data that we haven't explored as much in the past. Now we're able to tap into that and generate insights. And you get to see some really cool things. I'm thinking of some of the work that we do at CAS. So you probably heard of IoT, heard of telematics, of course. You're able to now look at data. You don't have to run it in batch anymore. You don't have to run it overnight. You can actually collect data on the fly and do real-time analysis on data. And that has lots of implications for insurance in terms of being able to detect when a claim is going to happen, and if it does, being able to mitigate the amount. So the second skill I would point out is what I call digital fluency, being able to understand the tools and the technology that exist in an era where data has volume, variety, and velocity. And the third trend is emerging risks. As you see when you look at things like climate, energy, there's so many different things that are pandemics, of course. How do you put a cost on risk when there's no prior historical precedent and you don't have as much data? Like one example I use is, I remember Bill Gates talks about climate and net zero. And I'm glad you mentioned in one of his TED Talks, when you think of net zero, people just think of shutting off the non-renewables. That's not gonna happen. Non-renewables serve a very important purpose. But you can do things like carbon capture and storage, where you capture the carbon under the water to be able to control how much comes into the atmosphere. So it's like thinking holistically of risk, you know. When you go to solar and wind, the sun doesn't come up every day, or it's not out as much every single day consistently. The wind doesn't blow every day. You have to think of variability. Energy itself is variable. So creativity is a third skill, thinking of how do you quantify and dimensionalize risk you know, in a world where it's rapidly evolving.
Thanks, Dom. Josh, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, when I think about comparisons to the past, you know, one of the things we talk about a lot here is the technical skills and the analytical skills. I think those things are really just table stakes, and those do evolve over time. You know, 50 years ago, no one was using Excel. Today, everyone uses Excel. Maybe if R and Python or whatever it takes to do the job now is required, then we need to keep up with that. We need to be able to do maintain those table stakes from the technical and analytical standpoint. But what I think is more different today than in the past is the world is more complex than ever, and it's changing at a faster pace than ever. We're dealing with all sorts of things that are changing now. The climate is changing. Technology is evolving at a rapid rate. From a social perspective, we see different interesting things like, I think there's been a focus more towards understanding causation rather than correlation, which is what we typically work with. And we see that through things like focuses on disparate impact, through the use of things like credit scores. That people say, well, you know, credit obviously doesn't cause people to get in accidents, and so it's not fair to certain groups of people that are using that. We also see that causation thing with things like loss prevention now, which has become a much bigger focus. And I think that's a great evolution for the industry, is that we're trying to prevent accidents rather than just saying, well, it's okay if something bad happens to you, we price for it. We don't want people to go through those negative experiences if we can avoid that. And if we can be a part of that solution and helping people, I think we should do that as well. So I think the big thing there with this complex and changing world is if we can be the partners that instill trust in our stakeholders, that we can help them navigate this complex and changing world, I think that's really powerful. I think if we can do that by first going out ourselves, understanding it, having the curiosity to go explore and ask questions about these evolving areas, and taking leadership to experiment, to go learn about it, and then also we have to be able to communicate those things clearly to our stakeholders.
Thanks, Josh. So taking this a step further, one of the ways that we as actuaries develop our skills is through the exam process. So our next question is centered around that. How do recent changes in the CAS credentialing process better prepare actuaries for real-world work? What more can be done? And we're actually going to start back with you, Josh, on this one.
Yeah, I think the exams get a lot of heat, and actually I think they do a pretty good job from a syllabus perspective and keeping up to date with what's there from a theoretical perspective. There was some talk the other day about how technical exams should be, and someone threw out like Bayesian, MCMC. That's already on exams. That's on MES 2 and 7. Like, we do test pretty technical things already from a theoretical perspective. I think that's pretty good. As far as the testing format, the thought has been, in theory, that this should be more like real-world work. I think, we never had exams in a spreadsheet format until like 2 years ago, but actuaries have been fine using Excel for like 30 years, and you can imagine, the CS 30 years ago saying like, well, should we have put, some kind of spreadsheet format so people can know how to use Excel on the job? I mean, maybe, but I don't know that anyone's using Pearson VUE now and thinking like, oh, now I know how to do things in my real world work. There may be some opportunity for making the format more like real practice. The other thing I think here that have been really positive changes is kind of rounding out actuaries. The course on professionalism now has evolved to include communication skills and bias topics, which are very relevant to our day-to-day work. We've got the CAS Institute, which has specialized credentials now for predictive analytics and CAT modeling. So if you want to get more practical learning in those areas, I think those are fantastic. And as far as what can be done in the future, ideally, I think we could have some kind of component making the exams more like the real world, so doing a full-on rate indication end to end, doing a full rate reserve review, kind of end to end, exploring the different methods. And you can imagine exams being more like a project, where you're asked to do a project, and then ideally even kind of present your project. Say like, hey, I did this full rate review, I did this full reserve review. Here's the description of my analysis, here's what I've done, and then demonstrating those communication skills, because we need that as professionals to be able to talk about our work in a way that others can understand them clearly.
Thanks, Josh. Rafael, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'll answer the second part first, because exactly, I had the same thought that Josh did. One thing that I would say is, I don't think that everything that we believe every actuary needs to know needs to be on exams. Because we have this tendency of saying, oh, this is something we need to know. Oh, there needs to be an exam for that. Like, do we need more exams? So we have to keep a good balance. Because there's always also different ways to get that knowledge. There's the online courses. There are micro-learning opportunities. We need to give people the opportunity to seek that for themselves and not be mandated to go after something we want them to know. And on that note, I'll answer the first part, which is something that was very close to me, and when I co-chaired the development of the third online course. Now those online courses are not called online courses anymore. I'm going to say online courses a few times because that's what you're familiar with, but they're called DISCs, which is Data and Insurance Series courses. And they don't have numbers anymore. It's not 1, 2, 3. It's Introduction to Data and Analytics, so DISC DA, which is the new one that was developed. DISC RM, which is Risk Management, and DISC IA, which is Insurance and Accounting. So those are the other two that existed before. So this new online course, this new DISC, is basically replacing Exam 3F. So to me, that's a very important move for the CES to enable the new generation of actuaries to come in at the door with knowledge that's useful on the day-to-day work. So do you prefer your entry-level actuary or students to understand data and understand how to manipulate data and implications, societal impacts of data? Or do you want them to know how to price derivatives and options? So the practicality of what folks are learning early on really matters to propel them into the career. So I think this was a very good step by the CES to make it happen and enable the generation of the future.
Thanks, Rafael. So speaking about getting practical, what are some good resources for actuaries who want to continue to develop their technical or communication skills, or to develop their network? John, can you start us off?
Yeah, when I think of this, I think of the learning pyramid. It talks about how you retain information based on what you hear, you see, and what you do. And it turns out, they talk about like when you go to a lecture, for instance, in college, and without further application, they say you only retain about, I think, 5% of the information. You know, on the other end of the spectrum, when you do something, they say you retain maybe 75%. And on the far extreme, like if you actually teach something, you retain 90%. So I know Josh is nodding his head, right? Josh can probably do legal diagrams in his head now, right? Because you've been doing this, you know, for so long. So when you think of those three things, technical skills, this one is very much, you just gotta practice, application. You know, a few options there, of course, doing work, getting involved in a work project if you want to do something that involves multivariate modeling. Find a project that incorporates multivariate modeling. Find something very specific that's going to bring out that technical skill that you're seeking to develop. Companies also will have internal courses. I remember taking a few courses early in my career on Visual Basic and SAS, but to be honest, was when I used SAS every day for 4 years, so that's really when I got it. This was the application piece. And there's also another option is open source learning. That's probably something good for like when you're starting to develop the more advanced analytic skills, which may or may not be as prevalent within your organization. That's another option. Then we get to what's the second one? Communication. This one, listening and observing, I've found is a lot more valuable for communication relative to, I would say, technical skills. I've learned a tremendous amount in my career from sitting in meetings and observing. Like if you work at a big company, go to a meeting with a chief actuary, sit there, listen to how they communicate, how they interact with the stakeholders. It's a reserving meeting. When do they ask about PYD? You know, how do they tackle the different nuances of the different lines of business. How do they send emails? How do they present? Like, you can observe and learn a lot from that. And that's gonna help you to pick up on things like tone, cadence, what questions do they ask, what are the relevant questions, so that you can have a better likelihood of getting the matching actions that you want in a particular situation. And then the last one is networking. Okay, so two pieces to this. I think of networking internally within your company. I know everyone, full disclosure, I know not everyone is big on speaking to people very often, but I certainly encourage you to the extent that you can, because it's very valid for me. How I learned early in my career as a business, I spoke to business partners. All of the business partners that supported my my department, I spoke to them to understand what they did. So it was like twofold. I was able to understand what they did, but also was able to build professional relationships with them. I think within the first 9 months of working, it's kind of crazy. My company, I met every single chief actuary in the company, one-on-one. Not saying you have to do that, but it was very valuable for me. And even some of them I maintained longer term relationships with, others I did. But even within the single interactions, you pick something up, from that. And then externally across your industry, you're at a conference, be sure to network, say hi to the people in the room, and when you go to the other events, and other so conferences, networking events, maybe locally where you are, and then LinkedIn, of course. Maintain an active presence on LinkedIn. Keep your, at least at a minimum, keep your profile picture active, your current position, I would say, at table stakes minimum. So those are a few suggestions there.
Thanks, Tom. So I'm actually going to expand a little bit on what he just shared, based on something that he had previously shared with me, around just this concept of like observing others and learning from them. There was a quote he said that just really struck me, so I wanted to share it. He said, "Be guided by, but not limited by, the examples you observe." I just think that's really powerful. Like, there is a lot of value to be gained by, seeking others that you look up to and aspire to be like, and drawing, good examples from them. But then realize that you are unique, and you need to, take what works for you and discard what doesn't, and just feel the freedom to, customize it to your style. So that was something that you had shared previously that I thought was super powerful.
Yeah, you'll find your own voice. You're gonna take things that are valuable, and you'll be able to figure out what works for you, what doesn't. Be guided by the examples, but develop your own voice as well.
Absolutely. Josh?
Yeah, sure. I think about this maybe I'll start with the least impactful things first and get to what I think is the most impactful. In terms of least impactful, the CAS has a lot of great content that's out there that's low lift, right? So the UCAS is fantastic, lots of good webinars for educational material. You can always go back and review exam papers. They've got good information if you want to just review your theoretical and technical basics. And as far as networking, then getting to the next level, you've got the CAS meetings here. So engage, go interact with people that are talking about or working on areas that you have interest in. There's also the CS regional affiliates. So we have the CS meetings here, but there's also I'm in Southern California, so we have the Southern California Casualty Actuarial Club. Go to those local meetings too. You meet people that are more local to you, and that can also be more impactful on a more recurring basis since they're local. You also have the affiliates, the diversity affiliates, so like OLA and IABA. Those can also be fantastic resources. Getting into what I think is the most impactful would be kind of hands-on learning, or hands-on things that you can do. So 2 things there. One is anything you can do in your job to, hey, this method might be really good for this reserve review I'm working on. I've never tried it, but let me explore it. Let me experiment. Anything you can do with that is going to be, you'll remember it better, and you get to learn it better through hands-on learning. And the second thing I'd say here is volunteering with the CAS or volunteering with other organizations too. Can be really fantastic to explore a new area, to network. I'll give you an example of this. A couple years ago, I was really getting into the startup scene in InsurTech and really curious about that. Well, the CAS developed a task force to explore on-demand insurance. And so I saw that and I just jumped on it. And I said, okay, yeah, I'll be on this group. And what I do is I leveraged that position and said like, hey, I'm on this task force, I started reaching out to a bunch of these InsurTech CEOs and say, hey, can I interview you? I'm on this task force. I had some kind of legitimacy now, and was able to get these great interviews, use that to do a couple publications the CAS put out, or I put out too. And just, you get fantastic networking opportunities, you get fantastic learning opportunities through those kinds of things, and again, you can make it what you want out of it, so definitely take advantage of those opportunities.
Absolutely. I don't think the value of volunteering can be overstated. I mean, let's be honest. Networking can be a little awkward. Like, it's hard to, initiate relationships with people, but if you have that natural in through volunteering and this connection that you have with other people, that can be so powerful and make it a lot more natural, for sure. So, Rafael, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, many of you probably share this thought with me. When I hear the word networking, it's a little bit terrifying. It doesn't seem like there's a purpose. Like, am I meeting these people for a reason? Do we have any shared goals? I worked at a company, I'm not going to name it, that had a program where every month they paired you up with a random person that worked in that same office to meet them for coffee. I signed up because I was new to the city and wanted to get to meet people. And I sat down and talked to them for a half an hour, and we each went our own ways. And that never really followed up, because apparently we didn't really have a lot in common. So from my perspective, networking needs to be aligned with a shared goal, with perhaps something technical. And then to me, volunteering is the best way. Volunteering with the CAS is an amazing opportunity, because you get to meet random people, but you're working on something that that is a shared goal, which is advance the profession, but at a macro level, but at a micro level, you're working on certain task force or your grading exams, whatever it is. So that would be number one. Number two, stretch assignments. When you work on these technical or networking things with the CAS, you can only go so deep, because of course you don't want to share company secrets. You can't really explore really deeply the technical aspects of any assignment. So some companies do have opportunity, or I guess many or most companies offer some opportunities for stretch assignments, where you can shadow someone on a different team, or even if you work on a price rate or reserve indication, you want to follow up to know how that went and what the conclusions of that job, that analysis were. You can ask to be involved in those meetings. Everybody has that possibility. But one example I want to give is when I worked at Farmers Insurance, they had data mining competitions. So that was a really good way to really go out there and try to learn something new. So what that was a team prepared a data set, and they wanted the teams to sign up and solve a business problem, which would be maximize cross-selling opportunities or maximize customer retention. And then these different teams who signed up to be part of the competition had to develop business strategies, essentially, to solve those problems. That's really aligned with the updated and vision feature of the CAS, right? Because we're using our technical skills to solve a business problem. And then the teams that advanced and had the best results got to present to the CEO and a group of executives. So presentation skills, communication skills also involved as a follow-up to the technical piece of it. And then the winners presented at an advanced analytics conference inside the company. So it's really a well-rounded way to get all of that developed. If you don't have that in your company, you can bring it. You can lead the development of an initiative like this, and you can be the group of actuaries solving a problem or enabling the solution of a problem.
Thanks, Rafael. That actually reminds me, so you mentioned, if your company doesn't have something like this, maybe you can start it. Well, we actually did something somewhat similar at my company, Root, recently. If any of you are familiar with hack days, this is something that engineers typically do, at least in the tech world, where they'll take 2 to 3 days to completely disconnect from their actual day-to-day work, and they get to work on whatever they want. Anything that uses their engineering skills to solve a business problem, or it could really even just be a personal passion of theirs. And this is something they do periodically throughout the year to kind of keep them creative and happy and really contributing to the business. Well, the actuaries at Root were like, that seems like a really great idea. We want to do that too. And so we worked with our leadership to essentially create hack days for our actuarial team. And so they were able to create indications of their own, or do any sort of analysis that they would have wanted to, but just didn't have the capacity for during their normal day-to-day work, because things are always so busy and moving so quickly. And so I definitely want to echo that you know, if there's something out there that you're wanting to do, push for it. You never know until you ask. So pivoting to a little bit of a bigger picture for our profession, what more should the CAS do to make the actuarial profession more known and attractive for potential candidates? Dom, can you start us off?
Yeah, sure. And maybe I'll caveat my response with saying that I'm happy to share some things that might be beneficial. I think I have the humility to know that I can't tell the CAS what they should do, but you know what I mean. And I like this question because exactly what I'm working on at Maverick Actuary, I see a lot of parallels. I'm focused on impact and value. This question is focused on marketing the profession itself. And I think there's three primary challenges when it comes to marketing the actuarial profession. The first is, give me a second. One is an explainable value proposition. Oh, sorry, the first one was name ID, name identification. So people don't know, most people, I mean, does that sound right? Like when you talk to someone, actuary, you know, like content or name identification, having an explainable value proposition and a strategic mindset. So let's talk about the first one. This is where media really comes into play, I think. It would benefit the profession. And these comments, by the way, it's not necessarily specific to the CAS. A few might be, but it's more broader to like the broader actuarial community. I think that the profession struggles with not having a presence in the media itself. Now, when you talk about Gen Z, how many Gen Zers we have in this room, if any? Okay. No, but I say because like we're talking about potential, we're talking about the future pipeline, right? Future pipeline here. So when you talk to Gen Z, you have to be able to speak in a language they understand on their platform of preference. And one of the things I've noticed is when you look at the content in the actuarial space, it's not that it's not valuable. I think it's just a little bit dated. And I've certainly learned from being on all of the major platforms and growing on Instagram and TikTok that the younger generation, they don't really read articles and things like that. They prefer consuming things in like video, in very specific, very succinct forms. And I did, Victor, I have to talk to Kate and Jess about this. I noticed that the CAS actually does not have a TikTok account. So that is one recommendation. One recommendation I would make, and on a serious note, like, and Chelsea's like becoming like the actuary on TikTok, right? TikTok is becoming, like someone said it the other day and I never believed it, but like it's becoming like Google for the younger generation. It sounds bizarre to some of us who were there on day one for Google, but you know, like it's no longer just like a little niche platform where people dance and make fun of each other. It's becoming the new Google. So I think it's table stakes. You gotta have representation on TikTok. So that's the first thing is when you come to name ID. Now when it comes to an explainable value proposition, not only do many people not know what an actuary does, but I think they don't really know what the brand stands for. And how many people here like watch TED Talks on occasion every so often? Yeah, right? How many people have seen the Simon Sinek TED Talk? Okay, a couple, right, yeah. So you know, he talks about the golden circle, he talks about some of the best brands, the most prolific brands, Apple, Nike. And he talks about, you know, Apple, like, they just happen to make computers, but what they really stand for is in everything they do, they want to challenge the status quo. So people really know what the brand stands for. It's not just the product itself. And I think the actuarial profession, not just the CAS, but the broader societies have an opportunity to help people learn, like, you know, what does actuarial brand actually mean? And he says that, you know, people, it's not about just selling to people who need what you have, it's to selling to people who believe what you believe. So when you connect with them on a deeper level, then you're more likely to get a better result. And then the last thing is strategic mindset. I think there's an opportunity. I know that the CAS does mention insurance and risk management in the strategic plan. I think there's an opportunity to double down more, to focus more on the risk management piece, because there's plenty of opportunities where you can apply an actuarial skill set outside of insurance. That's what I did the textile talk on, everybody knows That's all I talk about. So that's kind of like my bias there. But the second thing is that when you market the profession around insurance, like if you think of the average person, what do they think of when you think of insurance, right? Oh, my rates just went up. You know, so if you tie the brand too closely to insurance, I think there's a risk that it can be unappealing for that reason as well. So those are a few thoughts I have on that.
Thanks, Tom. Josh, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think if you want to make the profession pretty known, if you can help people win the $2.3 billion Powerball on Wednesday, it'll go a long way. I think the baseline here is we're going to continue to attract candidates who we've attracted in the past, right? We've had people who are math inclined, who are aware of the profession. I think that's going to continue to come in, and it's going to continue just to grow a bit just from there. But if we want to focus on getting people who wouldn't have otherwise come to the profession, I think of two groups. I think of underrepresented groups in the profession, and I think of people who are very technical and ambitious, who want to change the world in some way, and have a choice between different things like, should I go build the self-driving cars of the future, or should I work on things that help us get into space? And what can we do to make those kinds of people interested in the actual profession? So let me start with the underrepresented groups. I think the CS is doing a lot here, and it's tremendous. There's opportunity for awareness, accessibility, and support. Awareness, I think, just comes from getting our name out there. I think Dom and Chelsea, frankly, as content creators, are doing a lot in this area, and I think that there's more that can be done there. That influencers have become kind of a common theme these days in social media, and the more we can leverage those kinds of platforms to get at people who wouldn't otherwise know about the profession, I think that's a great access point. I think also being present locally where those groups are located, so that goes to, we can be volunteers at schools in those areas. We can make sure that exam testing sites are local to those people, that they don't have to travel for long distances to be able to take exams. And then support, like I mentioned earlier, we have groups like IABA and OLA and NAWA now. They're fantastic. I think the more that we can leverage those groups and give people the support that they need, I think that's fantastic. For the visionary people I talked about now, for like these people who could build rocket ships or be an actuary, what's going to make them come to the profession, I think, is kind of touching on what Dom said, is not tying it so much to insurance, but talking about the impact they can make on the world and highlighting actuaries who are in those roles, who are like, I'll give you a good example right now, is climate change is something that's very top of mind for a lot of people. We have an actuarial climate index that we publish. There's a CS group we could be more vocal talking about like, hey, we're helping the world understand climate change, and our analysis might identify some variables or things that we can do to make recommendations to help address that issue. That's a big platform we have. So, and there's also other things with technology. The more we can go out there and say like, hey, we're actually improving the world. We're not just actuarial scientists in a lab doing our science. Then I think that's going to attract those other kinds of people to the profession as well.
Absolutely. So let's take this a step further. What are the biggest threats to actuarial jobs? Rafael, can you start us off?
My opinion is probably very different from what most of you may have heard before from others, and maybe different from what Dom and Josh is going to say, but I'm optimistic and probably maybe overly optimistic, but I don't see the data scientist threat as a doomsday picture of the future of the profession.
Hey, that was my answer.
Wait, let me read my own. And so let me speak about this as upside versus downside risk. I think our position as actuaries in the traditional insurance space, with the type of work that we've been doing for decades, I don't see major risks there. We are known, we have really good reputation, we have very good training, we're in best position to do that kind of work. So I see very little downside risk. What I mean by upside risk though is, how do we expand? How do we go beyond traditional insurance? How do we go to those self-driving vehicle companies? How do we go to companies that are taking items to space to be actuaries and basically expand from beyond our actuarial labs to the business? I think that's where there is risk. And that's where there's something we should do there. And basically, we talked a lot about things we can do. So, but basically, get involved in the business, understanding the business, showing that we can go beyond spreadsheets, beyond keeping score, to actually translate those things into actionable insight. I think that's really the upside risk. We're not there. We're not proving to the world that we can do that.
Thank you, Rafael. Josh?
Yeah, I think of this one at an individual level and a macro level. So I think at an individual level, I would say the biggest threat is that our stakeholders don't want to work with us. That they come to us and say, help me understand this problem, or help me make a decision. And we're too much in the technical jargon, or we're just we look down instead of looking them in the eyes and we talk to them, or whatever it is. And they're like, well, I'd rather just work with this someone who I just enjoy working with more. It's not that the other person's smarter than you or knows their stuff better than you. It's just that be someone that people want to work with. And if we can't be that, then I think that's a threat. At a macro level, I think in theory, deregulation actually could be a threat. If there was less regulation and data scientists could run wild with black box models, then yes, I think that would make more of a data scientist more of a threat to the profession. But I don't see that happening anytime soon. The other thing I would think about at a macro level would be there's going to be better tools and systems out there. That's going to eliminate a lot of the basic work that actuaries do, and now it's going to be more like managing those tools rather than doing a lot of data prep and things like that. And finally, a big threat too would be if our stakeholders fail when we could have prevented that, and that gets back and reflects poorly on the profession. I think that's something that we want to make sure to avoid at all costs.
Absolutely. John?
Yeah, I think similarities to Rafa's answer for sure. I think the threat is really just actuaries having resistance to evolving and modernizing their individual value propositions. Sorry, I went blank a while ago. Give me a minute here, sorry, I just totally went blank. I have to look at my notes. Yes, so data science, right. When it comes to data science, people always say that data science is the biggest threat. No, here's why I disagree. There's nothing stopping any of you, especially if you work for a big company. Big companies, you have lots of data scientists who likely have an R&D team. You have ample opportunity to speak to them, to learn a thing or two. Even if they're not going to coach you one-on-one, they can probably point you in the direction to help you develop some skills. Some of the companies even have very formal initiatives where they'll actually put you on a project. Someone might have mentioned something earlier, but they have it with regards to data science. So, and there's nothing stopping you from going to Coursera, Kaggle, Udemy to develop some of those skills. So I think if data science happen to be a threat, develop data science skills. And I talked to Jessica long about this a few weeks ago on a podcast, and she talked about, the sweet spot is being an actuary with some of those data science skills themselves. So I think that's relevant. Another thing I'll mention is similar to the theme to what I touched on before, is the whole idea of thinking of our jobs as something that's in a static state and that's not dynamic. So when you think of the broader risk landscape, it's thinking of your underlying skill sets and how can you apply them. When you think of fundamentally of what actuaries do, I think of it as three things. We analyze, evaluate, and quantify risk. And what's more complicated and becoming even more complicated in today's world than risk itself. So I think the opportunities are there, and we are the only ones who are getting in our ways and diminishing our opportunities. I think we impact those. That's why we go ahead.
Thanks, Tom. So as an extension of what several of these guys have talked about in terms of making our role desirable for others to want to work with, this next question is, what can actuaries do to make themselves more interesting to future employers? And let's start with Josh.
Sure. I always kind of laugh at this because you see job postings that for a certain job, and the requirements are basically 2 to 3 years doing this exact job already. I mean, to the extent that you can get that experience elsewhere, obviously take initiative, volunteer, whatever it is, that's great. Otherwise, I think if you can do things that are visible outside of your own company, outside of your own boss, that's going to be very impactful. So, you can get experience through volunteering. Yeah, I mean, it can be all sorts of different ways. You can publish research papers if you want. It can be, social media, creating a brand presence for yourself that's outside of your own company. But the more you can do to get that kind of experience and put yourself out there, so your resume is not just attached to your company, that it's more you as a person, I think that strengthens you. And that's the last thing I just say here is, be a well-rounded person, be an add to company culture. So don't just come there and say like, well, I'm just really good at calculating things, but we'll have nothing else to talk about. Be someone that people are going to want to work with, want to be around, and have now that if you're done with exams, go find other things to do in life that actually are fun and that you can talk to people about.
Thanks, Josh. Dom, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think I'd even broaden the question to say not just to make yourself attractive to future employers, but to the market itself. And I think it comes down to being very deliberate and intentional with, proactive and intentional with your personal brand. Now, something I see every day, and believe me, I know a thing or two about LinkedIn, right? I've done this for many years. So the number one mistake I see people making is they tie their professional identity to their current employer. Now, if you're not Victor or Michael, right, okay, if you're a CEO or the CMO or something, maybe there are some narrow exceptions, but when you allow ourselves to be defined by the employers we serve, I think we do ourselves a disservice. It's harder for you to distinguish yourself from the next person, if you hide behind the company banner or the company logo. So certainly, reveal yourselves. I think having a personal brand that stands on its own is an ultimate differentiator. And the nice thing about, and I think you touched on this a little bit about social, is, well, first of all, figure out what your personal brand, similar to what I mentioned with the CAS earlier, it's actually on a micro level, figure out what your brand stands for, and find something. I know Rafa also said, you mentioned an important one, it's a challenge because you can't reveal proprietary things about the company, so you have to kind of build up your own thing. But maybe you're passionate about digital transformation, or about making insurance faster, smarter, better, or something, or faster, smarter, cheaper. You have the opportunity to post on social media. You can post, you can do articles, you can do videos, breaking down a topic that's relevant to your brand. So you can demonstrate your value that way. So that's another way I would say is just utilize your personal brand beyond media and help to demonstrate that value. Those are a couple of things.
Thanks, Dom. Rafael?
Yeah, I'll bend the question a little bit to not answer necessarily what can make you more interesting to future employers, but perhaps to your current employer, and also what can make the profession more interesting to you. How many of you have an active individual development plan? You wrote your own development plan, where you want to be, your strengths and opportunity areas. I see a half-raised hand.
Raised hands.
A lot of companies have this kind of tied with the performance review cycles. So you have your performance review. You also do your individual development plan that you just put something out there to check the box. It's like, okay, done. Met the HR requirements. In my experience, that was life-changing, creating an IDP. When I started my career back in Brazil, I had a very nice mentor, who was not my manager, who offered me for me to create my own IDP. He would help me review it. In that IDP, Individual Development Plan, I said that I wanted to have an international career, which at the time was completely unthinkable. It was something that was it was just my own unconstrained thinking about what I could build for myself in my career, what I really wanted to do. Which is really very important, because we want to be engaged in our own profession. We want to do things that really keep us awake during the day without coffee. We want to do things that make us jump out of bed on Monday morning to go to work. And this is beneficial to ourselves, it's also beneficial to our employers. They also want that, right? And future employers too. So that's what I would, and to follow up on that story, so fast forward from when I created my IDP back then and said I wanted to have an international career, they created an international rotation program. And because I had already expressed that I had that desire or you know, the future for myself, I was on the list to be a candidate for that position, and it happened. So this is your chance to build the actuary of the future, where you are the actuary. So it's really for yourself and for your teams. If you manage people, encourage them to really take it seriously. You might get to learn things that they really want to do that you didn't know about, that you can actually support them to do. And that helps you retain talent, because people might not seek whatever they want to do externally. They might be able to do it internally in their own companies. So it's very powerful. I highly recommend that everybody thinks a little bit more about that.
I was just gonna add to that. I think this is like a really, I think I might be onto something. I think it's important for you to develop, or at least there's an opportunity, you don't have to, of course, but to develop like what I call like a reel, which is essentially just like, you know, a series of content that you post, or your professional engagements. I would say, like, in the extreme sense, like if you go on my LinkedIn or my website, you'll be able to see everything I've done professionally for the past several years. And why that's beneficial is that when you go to a subsequent employer, someone who you want to work with, when they have some of that information on you, like I'll give you another example. Like I interviewed Matt Saker last week on my podcast. He's the president of the IFOA. And it was a really tough interview for me to do because I didn't really have as many connections on the UK side. But one of the reasons that I think they agreed to that is because they were able to listen to some of the prior episodes that I had with their members. So don't underestimate the value of having something tangible, especially in an environment when, you know, you're not able to share your work, your everyday work projects that is proprietary. Having your individual reel, like in the same way that an actor or an athlete has their own reels of performances, I think is very beneficial for your career, and I would not be surprised if it became mainstream. I don't know if it will replace the resume, but I think it's going to become a lot more mainstream going forward as social continues to expand.
Absolutely. And maybe just one other thought I had as you guys were sharing, something else I've seen be really impressive on resumes is when candidates include like hobbies or passions outside work that they do that use actuarial skills. I think that can go a long way if you have things in your life. I mean, there's so much we do that uses these skills and we just don't even recognize it. So be willing to talk about the things you really care about, that you're very interested in, and that is very appealing to others, and will show that you can use these skills in a variety of different ways. So to end off this session, we have one more question, and then we're going to turn it over to you guys to hear what your thoughts are and what questions you have. So be thinking, because we're coming to you shortly. But our last question is, what are some traits of the most successful actuaries you've seen? And Dom, we'll start with you on this one.
Yeah, so hopefully you guys answer the question a bit more generally. I think my answer is a bit more narrow to like actuarial leaders, so people who are more senior. But I think the first thing is they have great interpersonal skills. It's very hard for you to get people to follow you and to get buy-in when you don't have skills like empathy, EQ type skills, when you don't understand that people within your organizations are more than just a number. So the first thing, they all have really good, or the ones I've seen have very good interpersonal skills. Another one is self-awareness. There's an actuary in my first company, and it was really interesting. We had a conversation and he said to me, he knew very early in his career that he wasn't good at the technical, or what you call the technical stuff, like Excel. That's I guess what was technical back then. He was more business value focused, and so he leaned on the product management side. He didn't spend time trying to become a better technical actuary. He just leaned into the stuff that was innate and natural to him. And he ended up, now today he's a CEO, he's paved a tremendous career path. So I mentioned self-awareness, knowing like what you're good at and being able to hone and harness those skills so you can produce value. Another one is, I call it effective resource management. Like leaders in the actuarial space, which is probably not different from other spaces, they understand that as a leader, you need to be more of a coach than a player. So it's not your job to do the analysis. You have people who are going to do that. So even though you're not doing the analysis, you need to have a minimal viable understanding. You need to know, okay, generally speaking, how long would this type of analysis take? What are some of the limitations? You have to still be able to know enough to be dangerous, but to be able to delegate and manage a group. And then the last thing I'll mention is they have good business instincts. They can look at some of that. The chief actuaries in particular I've seen were really effective. They can look at an exhibit and say, okay, this number doesn't make sense. They didn't touch the analysis, but they can look at that and know, no, that makes no sense. I don't even have to go into that. So those are a few things.
Thanks, Tom. Rafael, what are your thoughts?
Two things. One, discipline. And under that trait, I think everybody in this room is successful because you all passed a bunch of exams. So cheers to the new associates and new fellows for that too. So discipline to me is number one. And it goes beyond studying for exams. In our normal day-to-day, we have so much to do, so much to take care of at work or outside of work. So discipline is super important to success. And when I think of success, I'm not saying success means you rise through the ranks and you're a chief actuary or a CEO. Everybody can be successful in their own role, whatever their IDP tells them success means. So you tell yourself what success means and you define that. But discipline is a must for you to reach whatever goals you have. And then the second one is acting like an owner. In both of my current company and previous company, this was valued as an employee behavior, and to me it's eye-opening because we're not really entitled to our jobs. We need to prove that we have value to add. And from the updated CAS and Vision Future, remember we're going from being scorekeepers to being problem solvers. But I would say let's reach for the stars and be problem spotters. Let's be problem finders as well. And I think when you're acting like an owner, you can actually, you enable yourself to find problems, even outside of your normal day-to-day job. If you are successful at intertwining with the rest of the company, you're able to see those things that perhaps the true owners of those pieces of the work are not able to find because they're biased, because they're used to that. So you can offer that outsider view to find these problems and help solve them. So discipline and acting like an owner.
Thanks, Rafael. All right, now it is your turn. So please feel free to raise your hand if you have a question. If you're comfortable, you're welcome to come up and speak into the mic. But if you do share your question from your seat, please try to keep it to one at a time so I can repeat the question back for those listening online. So what questions do you guys have?
Or we can throw the microphone.
Yeah. Go for it.
Hello. So I had a kid 2 years ago, so I'm a working parent. I don't know if any of you guys can relate or not. But I think a lot of people put exams on hold, or vice versa, put family on hold to take exams. And then once you have a kid, or you have a family, how do you go about doing the things that you guys talked about and maintaining a solid family relationship and whatnot? How do I, for example, I think you had said after you're done with exams, do fun stuff that are interesting and how do I go about that and, impact my career but also have a solid family foundation?
I actually have an interesting answer. It just came to me. If you've noticed, do you spend time on LinkedIn at all?
Yeah, well, yeah.
Sometimes you do.
This page.
Yeah.
A little bit, yeah.
No, there's been a lot of evolution on the content on LinkedIn, and what people have been doing since the pandemic is they've been integrating their family life into their content. And I'm not saying you should share personal stuff, but it's very powerful when you can combine a personal story with a teachable business lesson. So I would say, to the extent, of course, that you're comfortable, certainly think of ways that you can incorporate what you're experiencing in your life, to the extent it impacts your career. So that's one way that you can really combine the two.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
I would just add that I don't think all of the developmental skills are like technical actuarial skills. So there, one of the biggest skills we've talked about is empathy, is being well-rounded, having things to talk to people about, and those are all things that just things you do with your family, like, oh, we went to SeaWorld or whatever it was, and those are things you can connect with people at the office about. And so that's very, very powerful. In fact, in many cases, more powerful than spending an hour or two just reading up on some new model. Or, yeah.
No, thank you so much. That's very helpful.
Yeah. Thanks for the question, Nicole. Yeah?
There was a question how to make profession more known, and a lot of actuaries serve as liaisons to various universities. Are there any efforts to reach out to even younger population, like high school students?
Yeah, great question. So she mentioned that actuaries are often liaisons for universities, but are there efforts to reach younger generations like high school students or younger?
I'm aware of OLA going to high schools and especially underserved communities to speak about the profession. So there are initiatives. I'm only aware of OLA, but perhaps others are doing similar things. But that's not to say that's enough, right? There's always more we can do. The struggle is always to find volunteers to do it. So
I think there's also the CAS Student Central, right? That's something that, I know they have a program,
Yes.
Victor's nodding, so yes. They have a
Yes.
program in the summer, right? I think it's a summer program.
Yeah, between CAS Student Central, as well as the Actuarial Foundation. So Jason Levin, who's the executive director of the Actuarial Foundation, they put a lot of energy into high school students and youth movements. So he's here on site, so if you want to take an opportunity to visit with him in the exhibit area, you can probably go into some more detail on that as well.
Yeah, I also have a friend who's actually on the life health side of things, and I don't know if he has even like a formal organization, but he's just super passionate about, you know, sharing about the profession and equipping others, and so he has just organized groups to go speak to like high school students, and so I think that's just an encouragement that like if that's something that you are also passionate about doing, and if there's not, you know, the right organization out there, then like you can start something. So I really appreciate that question. Thank you. What else is on your mind? Go for it.
I actually have two questions. My first one is I've noticed a lot in my career, like I work directly with underwriters and brokers a lot, and they're typically much more outgoing people, and they also have to connect with each other more, so they form relationships through networking much more easily than actuaries do, because we're not always invited to those things. So I'm just wondering, how can we compete with those, with underwriters and brokers for more leadership roles in the future?
That's a really good one. I mean, I worked with underwriters for several years. I don't know if my answer is going to be perfect, but like one way is like, whether it means the long-term goal is to actually take on a role like an RVP or a regional underwriting officer kind of role, like literally immerse yourself in that environment at the level where it's available or where you're able to. And also there's roles, I certainly had a role at Travelers for a few years where I guess you could say it was kind of non-traditional, it was technically an actuarial role, but our primary business partners were the underwriting and product partners. So getting into roles or situations where you're closer to that end of the work is one way of tackling that.
I would actually challenge the assumption that because we are different, we might not be accepted.
I think it's more just that they have more opportunity to form relationships. Yeah.
No, I understand.
Yeah.
Not saying it's not happening. It is happening, but I would say maybe sometimes under that assumption or that perception, we end up limiting ourselves to go out there and even be present. So, and with companies talking so much about diversity, this is diversity as well. It's a different type of personality, assuming taking a different role. So let's hold them accountable to the diversity speech, to embrace the different personalities in there too.
I guess I would say, I wouldn't think of it as a competition. I would think about, you know, what you are interested in and what you want to do and what you want to talk about and who you want to spend time with. And, you know, it could be that, like, okay, you know, we won the invitation to those meetings now, but we don't really like talking to any of those people. or we have nothing to talk about. And so, like, have we really gained anything? So, if you can, you know, focus on what you're interested in. If you know, if you want to have more meetings with other people, you can invite them to your meetings, your events, or something like that. You can take initiative. Otherwise, you know, if you want to build relationships with certain people in leadership, you know, you can do that. Find opportunities, find projects that you can take initiative on, and build it for what works for you.
Sorry, I had one more question, totally different subject, but I recognize Chelsea and Dom, I'm sure like many of us do, from popping up on our LinkedIn feeds. And I was just wondering if you've seen an impact from your platforms in terms of like growing the actuarial field.
Go ahead, Chelsea, you go.
Thank you for the question. I have honestly been shocked. I started posting on social media, I mean, it was like, I felt like I was dragged into it. Like, I did not want to use social media. And, you know, TikTok was brought up earlier. I have no idea what I am doing on that platform. Like, and I'm not dancing. Like, I'm just talking to the camera about actuarial things. And what has blown me away is the algorithm is actually very, very good. Like, within a couple of months of being on the platform, I had reached over 1,000 followers, and I did nothing but post on the platform about actuarial stuff, and it blows my mind. Like, I think it is really powerful when you know, tie your story or your person behind this profession and just not the numbers. Like, that something just resonates with people, and some of these social media platforms are really powerful. So I've been truly just like blown away at the number of people that have reached out to me and just like mentioned that like content I've created was helpful to them, and like that does mean so much because that's why we both are doing this. And so I have been pleasantly surprised. I mean, truly, when I started this, I thought if one person listens to what I have to say about actuaries and insurance, then I'll be happy. So it's been more than I could have ever imagined.
Yeah, I think I'll answer it from two levels. Like on a micro level, and this is some of the stuff that you won't see. You know, like especially on my Instagram. Like I have a different approach on different platforms, but Instagram is really a community. You know, it's like I'm doing content, I'm answering questions on Q&A and story. But people reach out to me all the time and they're like, you know, I'm just feeling so overwhelmed. I mean, someone in England reached. Another thing too, like how I know like it's having some traction is like I'm meeting actuaries like in places I didn't even know actuaries were. Pakistan, Nepal, all over the globe. But like someone from England reached out to me the other day and said, I'm so stressed, I'm crying, all this stuff. I think she might have just feeling she has a couple under her belt. And I'm thinking that she's like years into her career, but she just finished her first internship. I'm like, it's okay, you have time, you know? So you know, they're to provide some support, but yes, to Chelsea's point, like sometimes when people will see the content and say, oh wow, something that I take for granted because I've been in the field for 10 years, oh wow, like that inspired me to try this at work, or like, oh, I didn't know that. My website, I have a resource page that just talks about the societies. As a CAS, IFOA, SOA. That's something simple to me, but they're like, oh, I didn't know anything about actuarial, but I've learned so much from this page. So that's on a micro level, I would say, like, there's been some impact person to person. And through the podcast, I think I've had this great opportunity to collaborate with the global actuarial organizations, the CAS, IFOA, SOA. So when we have guests on, we post about it on LinkedIn. People listen to the episodes and they learn. People reach out to me because my audience is broader than just actuarial. So we certainly are having some impact, and to your point, you're encouraging me to quantify that better, and but thank you. It's a really thoughtful question. I appreciate it. But yes, thankfully we're having good results, and I know Chelsea's having good results because we talk all the time. I'm very aware of what's happening on our page as well. So it's been positive so far.
Yeah. I think one other just kind of funny thing to share. So a few years back when I was getting my fellowship and sitting in your seats, like I remember having this thought of like, man, it would be really cool to like speak at a conference someday. Like, I think that'd be really neat, but like I have no idea how I could possibly get there. Like, I'm not an expert in anything. And just, it blew my mind that all I did as really no one special, just someone who's super passionate about what I'm talking about, just started posting on social media, and people reach out to me to come to speak at things, and I'm just like, I have nobody, like, why do you want me to talk? And so I just think it is really encouraging how powerful social media can be, like, just like being vocal about things that like you're passionate about and that matter to you. Yeah, people are drawn to that, and if you want to do something like that, could open a door that you had no idea could be open. So I think I saw a couple of other hands raised. Yeah, go ahead.
It wasn't a question, it's a comment actually. It ties into our topic about attracting young talent and the question we had, how we can approach young kids and high schoolers. I think one of the things we struggle with, and a lot of us are guilty here, is explaining what we do to a lot of folks. And I mean, it was just a curious thought. I looked up Wikipedia, and Wikipedia says actuarial science is the discipline that applies mathematical, statistical methods to assess risk in insurance, pension, finance, investment, etc. Like, does that sound attractive to a high schooler? No. So I think we could all just make a conscious effort of thinking, like Michael Scott says in Office, explain it to me like I'm 5. So just thinking about it that way, like how we can explain what we do every day. And I mean, just for background, I'm very new in the industry. I graduated college last year, so I'm always in meetings where I don't understand stuff, acronyms and all sorts of things. So just making a conscious effort to judge your audience and thinking about how we can break this down for them so that it's easy to digest and understand. Maybe they get interested in asking questions back, so stuff like that, yeah.
How comes I never saw your hand up for the Gen Z question?
Awesome, thank you so much for those comments. Well, we are at time, so we're going to wrap up for today.
Hey Chelsea, we gotta do a selfie. I'm gonna be that guy. Everyone, look at the camera. After 3, we're gonna say actuary of the future. 1, 2, 3. Actuary of the future.
All right. Can you all please join me real quickly and give them a round of applause? Thank you again so much for coming.
Feel free to come say hi if you want.
Yes, yes. Please stick around if you have other questions or you want to chat. But thank you so much.